All right, y'all, you're locked on Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman, and today is Crossover Thursday, where I will be joined by the host of Locked on Browns, Jeff Lloyd and Garrett Bush, to preview this Week 4 matchup between the Browns and Atlanta Falcons.
You are Locked on Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at falcfans.com, RIP, still going strong on Twitter at falcfans, and of course, the host of this illustrious Locked on Falcons podcast. And today's Locked on Falcons is a crossover Thursday presented by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is fun. It's easy to play. There's no competing with other players. It's just you versus the projections. All you got to do is pick 2 to 5 players. And if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It literally can take less than 60 seconds to enter. It's that easy. We love Prize Picks, and we know you will love it too. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So, guys, we thank you for making Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday. Of course, Locked On Falcons is free and available on a variety of podcast platforms, including Apple, Odyssey, Google, Spotify, and of course, here on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Falcons on YouTube. Hit that bell, give us a like, and you will get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. So without further ado, let's jump into Crossover Thursday with Locked On Browns, the preview Week 4.
It is Crossover Thursday on the Locked On Podcast Network. The Cleveland Browns and the Atlanta Falcons. We were just talking here before we actually kicked things off. It's been 4 years, and it seems like it was so close, but yet so long ago. Jeff Lloyd, host of Locked On Browns. Garrett Bush, host of Locked On Browns. Mr. Aaron Freeman, host of the Locked On Falcons podcast. We're going to sit it down here, talk a little bit about the matchups this week. We're going to get in a little bit some of the biggest stories of each team here. The 2-1 Browns, the 1-2 Falcons coming off a West Coast win here. Questions about, I think the game should be okay, but we are talking about a hurricane, so stuff gets a little bit crazy here. It's going to be a fun matchup this week. And we're going to kick it off here. I'll go right into it as far as the biggest stories. For me, Aaron, I look at this team and like what you're looking for as far as skill, talent, you're looking for top players around. Drake London, and I think this is where everybody got confused. There was no testing. So when there's no testing, people can try to display or build up their own narratives about what a player is and he isn't. Drake London looks the part. I think for Pitts, it's just been a little bit of more just trying to find a way to get the quarterback the right fit. Cordarrelle Patterson, are you stinking kidding me for what he's doing after all these years in his league? Highest yards per carry in the NFL currently. So some thoughts there on those guys. Of course, as this team transitions, and then maybe just a thought or two on the quarterback position, because similar to some other teams in this league, you brought in a veteran, but you brought in a rookie, and here we are yet to Week 4, and it's still going to be the veteran, leading this offense.
Yeah, it's been an interesting run for the Falcons so far in these first 3 weeks of the 2022 season. And when you look at some of these weapons that the Falcons have had and these guys getting off to some pretty promising starts, although, the fantasy football community was pretty upset with the relatively slow start for Kyle Pitts in those first 2 weeks, but seemed to get things back on track in Week 3. And Drake London has looked the part as the team's sort of number one wide receiver and the top wide receiver drafted. The quarterback situation, Mariota's been solid for the most part. There's probably a little too many ups and downs for Falcon fans' taste. I termed it the Mariota coaster, a couple of weeks ago, where it's just kind of you have to kind of live with those ups and downs as he kind of knocks off this rust so far. And I think it all sort of heads for this weekend's matchup where you're just trying to figure out if the Falcons are for real, right? And they're coming off their first win of the season after two very, very hard fought and close losses in weeks 1 and 2 to the Saints and Rams, but they beat the Seahawks again, another close game. It's nice to see this team being competitive against some of these quality opponents that they are facing so far this year. They'll get another one in the Browns this weekend, which was not the case a year ago, starting in 2021, where basically they were beating up on, or not beating up, but barely winning against bad teams and basically being not competitive at all against some of the better teams they faced in their schedule. And so I think this Browns team is really going to be a great litmus test to sort of see if the Falcons can build off of that to get their second win of the season, to possibly in a row, because I look at this Browns team, they're not necessarily an elite football team, but I think under Kevin Stefanski, they've become a very competent team. He seems like a well-respected coach. I'm sure the people in Cleveland may perceive it differently because, hometown fans always sort of see things a little bit differently than the outsiders do. But Stefanski's brought stability to an organization that really has sorely lacked it for the last 20 years. And I think the Falcons are trying to follow that, suit with that with Arthur Smith here in Atlanta. And, obviously the Falcons haven't necessarily had, instability for, as long as Cleveland has had, but certainly these last couple of years didn't turn out quite the way that Atlanta had drawn it up, where it seemed like they were one of the up and coming teams, not that long ago. And ever since that Super Bowl loss, it just seems to be pointing down. And it's just, can Arthur Smith sort of, right the ship? And so far, starting out this 2022 season, even though the Falcons are 1-2, things look pretty good.
Yeah, Aaron, I look at it like this. You just said something that really, I think rings true. I can't really believe that, at one point in time, you go from Matt Ryan being MVP, you go from them being in the Super Bowl and being up all those points against the New England Patriots, and then all of a sudden you are here where you are now. So to me, I think that's one of the things that shows you in an NFL that you could be at one place at one time, and then in a couple of years you could be on the other side of the barrel, so to speak, in terms of what you are viability as contenders. That is just how quickly things change. And I look at this team, and the Falcons are rebuilding, but I think they're doing, their new thing. Like before the Cleveland Browns, we really tanked. Like, there was years Jeff was doing this podcast and we went through the 1-31 era with Hugh Jackson. Those teams were unbearable to watch. It just was what it was. I mean, it probably either killed off half the fan base early or gave them health problems, because it was just so hard to be a Browns fan, even wear your colors, when you were tearing it down to the studs. I think Atlanta's doing a rebuild, but they're doing it on the run, so to speak. Marcus Mariota is a quarterback who can move a little bit. He's a former top 5 pick, and I think he has some things that he can do to make it tough on the defense, as far as using the read option and using and extending plays. And then they got Kyle Pitts and now Drake London, who looks to be every part of a stud. So now they're trying to rehabilitate it, and you catch lightning in a bottle with Cordarrelle Patterson. And for me, is how did they have the foresight of just putting Cordarrelle Patterson at running back, and it just worked? When you first saw it in Atlanta, were you guys thinking like, come on, man, this is crazy? It's a receiver at running back.
Yeah, it was unexpected. A lot of sort of hindsight. It says, we all saw it coming. Like, I don't think anybody really saw it coming. I don't even think the Falcons really saw it coming, because like a lot of people last summer were questioning the running back depth after Mike Davis, and they brought in Wayne Gallman right before the season. And so that kind of told you that the team wasn't 100% sold that, Cordarrelle Patterson would become the player that he was last season. But the thing that the Falcons, their story now is that like they had a lot of coaches from that Chicago Bears staff, from that Matt Nagy staff that came over, and those guys were, basically pounding the table for Cordarrelle Patterson, and it's paying off for this team right now, like with their running game. And he's kind of, the secret sauce to their offense. He's the foundation of their offense. That ability to run the football is really what's opening up so many other things for this offense. And I'm sure, Browns fans are very familiar with that, with Nick Chubb and what he brings to the table for that team. I'm very curious from your guys' perspective, what is sort of the big story this week? I imagine a lot of it is revolving around, Myles Garrett's availability and some of the injury issues that the Browns are dealing with so far early in the season.
Oh, there's no question. And it's been a rocky week here. Monday, the Browns had played Thursday. So, by Monday, we were kind of taxed out. It was like, all right, we did our pod. We can kind of just, lay low in the weeds, catch up a little bit. Garrett's married. I got a family. And then all of a sudden here it was like 4:00. It was like, oh no, Myles Garrett was in a car accident. We know, and it was like, it's like, man, can we ever just turn it off? But fortunately for the Browns, everything seems like it's turned out pretty well on that avenue. I mean, as far as when you say, anybody was in a car accident and the car rolled over, and then you find out, hey, it's a couple of sprains and some cuts and bruises and some scrapes. It's like, well, okay, fantastic. But the Browns have always been cautious, and this is one thing Garrett and I talk about. Under this Stefanski-Barrett regime, there's been times where guys were probably good enough to go on a Sunday, and the Browns said, you want to know what? I'd rather you 100% next week than maybe you 80% this week. To even fathom the thought process that, Myles Garrett was in a car that flipped over once, twice, we don't even know. And they're going to let him go out there 6 days later. It seems kind of crazy. I'm not going to lie. I know they're providing all the great lip service right now as far as, he's not out, and, you got to do the dance. You got to do the dalliance, of course. So we'll see the way it plays out. But then you get to the linebacker position. It's one thing to lose Anthony Walker for the season. When he was a guy that was kind of like, the big brother of the room, everybody, was getting better through Anthony Walker as far as due diligence, how to play the game, what you needed to do. But then, now he's gone. But now you lose the guy who was potentially your best linebacker. And we don't know where Jeremiah owusu-koramoah is as far as his injury, whether or not he'll be able to go this week. And for him, it's an opportunity to go play a game closer to home. So then you get to now Jacob Phillips, former LSU guy. And look, we got faith in Jacob Phillips. We think he's a player. But, every time it seemed like the Browns were ready to lean on Jacob Phillips was when something happened and he got hurt or COVID and missed time. Then you have Tony Fields, another backup linebacker. But the Browns right now are in a spot where, on the roster, they have 3 healthy defensive ends and 4 healthy linebackers. That's a tough spot to be in when we're about to, go play a game in 4 days.
Oh, look, to me, I think the injuries are the huge part. What is the game plan now against a mobile quarterback in Marcus Mariota, where you don't have Jadeveon Clowney or possibly don't have him? You possibly are going to be without Myles Garrett. You got JOK, who's a little banged up as well. You don't know what the the prognosis is on him. So now the guys that are your most athletic guys, your guys that can get after the quarterback and run sideline to sideline, are not available. You're going against a quarterback that can use his legs, can hurt you with his legs. And so that presents a huge problem now if you have guys like Alex Wright and Isaiah Thomas. And if if you thought Isaiah Thomas was the basketball player, we do have a guy named Isaiah Thomas who plays defensive end. I would not, I don't begrudge you for not knowing that. But when you got names like that, trying to contain Mariota and trying to, get after Cordarrelle Patterson and make it, stop him, it gives you a lot of pause on thinking what the game plan is going to be from Joe Woods. He's going to have to mix up his game plan, bring some people, maybe be exotic a little bit, and try to keep the Falcons off schedule. But to me, that is definitely one of the areas that we're looking at, the Browns defensive line and linebackers against that offense.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting matchup. I know Isaiah Thomas. I watched a little Oklahoma this past year, so I know a little bit thing about him.
Well, and the other thing is, which Isaiah Thomas from the NBA would he be? It is crossover Thursday. We got Locked On Falcons. We got Locked On Browns. Jeff, Lloyd, Garrett Bush, Aaron Freeman. It's always good to do these episodes. It's kind of fun to sit down because, Browns and Falcons don't play a lot. And it's weird because there's few people that have been around with Locked On as long as Aaron and I are. So it's, when you play only once every 4 years to get to sit down and do this again, and so much has happened. between these franchises in that period. So it's crazy to see the way it works out. We're going to get back to it here, get down to a little bit of the matchups here and some things that, Aaron's looking forward to see. And of course, Garrett and I are looking forward to see. Locked On Browns across over Thursday. BetOnline.net is your number one source for your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, the NFL, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Well, guys, it's Crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks. And of course, Aaron Freeman here, Locked On Falcons, Jeff Lloyd, Garrett Bush, Locked On Browns. We're talking about this matchup. We've already talked a little bit about some of the injuries affecting this matchup for the Browns, especially the Falcons, relatively healthy at this point in time in the season. And that let's sort of kick things off there, because I'm looking at this Browns injury situation in their front seven. And I'm thinking, hey, let's let the Falcons feed Cordarrelle Patterson, feed Mariota, get this run game going. Let's see between these two teams if they can kind of have a race to who can get to 200 yards rushing. And whoever can get there fastest or tack up the most yards, probably will be the team that can control this game and potentially win this game. So I'm looking at the Garrett injury, the Clowney injury, JOK potentially. We already knew the Browns interior D-line was not necessarily a strength of that football team. Even if they were fully healthy, you did like the Falcons' chances of being able to run the football potentially down their throats in that regard. And now you take out their two big-time edge rushers and potentially, their most dynamic linebacker, and it feels like this is an opportunity for this Falcons running game to really put itself on the map this weekend.
Oh, yeah. I like what you said. A rush to 200 yards. I think you got I believe Cordarrelle Patterson was number 2 in the league in rushing. I think Saquon Barkley is edging him by like 2 rushing yards. However, you still got number 1, number 3 in the mix. And obviously Kareem Hunt is going to touch the football a lot as well. I think this game is really going to come down to who can make enough plays in the passing game. Can Mariota hit Drake London? Can he find Kyle Pitts? The Browns secondary has given up some yardage and has given up some big plays, especially in inopportune times. I look at a matchup that is kind of outside of the trenches, because I do agree with you. That's an area that the Browns, I don't believe, are the best at in this matchup, especially if Clowney and especially if Myles Garrett doesn't play. However, when you look on the outside, a receiver, you got Denzel Ward on Drake London. And obviously, Denzel Ward is used to be and traditionally is a top 10 corner and playing like it. But you look at his PFF grades, they've slipped a little bit here in Cleveland. People have been on him. And what we need to, this doesn't look like the Denzel Ward we know. Now, he still has talent through a small sample size, and he still has the ability to be that top 10 corner. He just has to play up to his capabilities and stop giving up missed assignments. But when you look at him and Drake London is a big receiver, big body, moves a little better than I thought. Coming out of the draft, I thought he was a little more stiff than he is, but he's shown fluidity. I think between him and Chris Olave, they look, and Garrett Wilson, they're some would argue they look like the best rookies at the position coming into the season. I'm anxious to see if Denzel Ward will follow him through the field or lock onto him and say, hey, I got Drake London, this is what we're going to do, right? Or will they just play regular coverage, and wherever Drake London is, whoever to have him will have him. I'm interested to see how Denzel Ward in this secondary plays against those big targets in Kyle Pitts and Drake London.
Yes, I think that's a key matchup. You're right. I know at least for my eyes, traditionally, I sort of like Denzel Ward a little bit more against those quicker, faster receivers than necessarily the bigger guys like Drake London. So I'm very curious to see if that lives up to the billing if Drake London can sort of feast on Denzel Ward, who's not off to the strongest start. Similarly, AJ Terrell was not off to the strongest start in weeks 1 and 2. And this past week,
Aaron, just to jump in real quick, and this is actually funny because 2018, obviously Denzel Ward was a rookie, and at the time it was TJ Carey. He played a really good game. Like Julio Jones had like 11 for like 110, but TJ Carey was with him the entire game. And now here we are, and you think Drake London maybe not the athletic freak that Julio was, but now we're actually having the same conversation. Would it be Denzel Ward? But you're totally 100% correct. I didn't mean to cut you off, but you're 100% correct that this is really a matchup where the Browns are probably going to pass off from Denzel Ward.
Yeah, and talking about how AJ Terrell played this past weekend, he shadowed DK Metcalf this past weekend, and at least when he was in man coverage against DK, really held him in check, held him basically 2 catches on basically 7 targets, had 3 pass breakups in that game, and that was sort of a bounce back game for AJ Terrell, who had a little bit of a rough start, particularly when it came to some of those red zone plays against Michael Thomas and Allen Robinson in weeks 1 and 2. And I'm very curious to see if the Falcons follow suit on that this weekend against Amari Cooper, right? Who's come on really strong, much to my chagrin, because he's on my fantasy bench. And so I kind of need Amari Cooper, and so I'm sitting here hassling, okay, AJ's coming off a really good game. He might keep Amari Cooper in check. So, for selfish reasons, I'm wondering if he's going to be able to keep him contained for my fantasy football team. But I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup. And Amari Cooper is one of the best receivers in the league, and one of the best route runners in the league. And, at least if AJ shows like what he showed in week 3, I feel like that matchup between him and Cooper favors the Falcons, at least relatively speaking, a little bit more than maybe the potential Ward matchup does in favor of Cleveland against Drake London. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I agree with you there, Aaron. The thing is it's just not really Denzel. It's a quick thing. It's a footwork thing. And look, at the end of the day, as guys who are around the game, covered the game, played the game, whatever it was, look, that there's certain calling cards you just don't have. You just don't. Martin Emerson is certainly a much better matchup for Drake London than Denzel Ward is. Greg Newsome is even a better matchup for Drake London than Denzel Ward is. And the other thing is, if Drake London right now is basically the fire you're trying to put out, Denzel Ward, it's been a rough couple of weeks. I mean, I know some people way up in arms. Look, anybody in the NFL can put together a bad month. It's the toughest of the tough. It's just the way it goes. Sometimes guys just, when he's on the injury report, I don't think it's much, but I think it's more just like hey, do what you got to do, get yourself ready, for Sunday. And it certainly has been, tough sledding, so to speak, for Denzel. And Kyle Pitts certainly brings up another, bag of issues as well, because the Browns historically have been bad against tight ends. They've been pretty good against tight ends to this point this season, but historically bad, and questions about the linebacker position. And Garrett and I were speaking today. Look, if you're light on linebackers, which the Browns very well could be going into this game Sunday, Joe Woods loves his safeties. So, you already played Grant Delpit. You already played John Johnson III. You could see some Ronnie Harrison. Aaron, you could see former UGA Bulldog Richard LeCount get some reps this week, because the Browns, their safeties are more athletic than their linebackers, but the size differential isn't enough where you're going to, change it. And, you may want to look for something like that, too, from the Browns secondary this week, because it's definitely going to be like when your mom said, well, I got this ingredient, this ingredient, this ingredient, and I'm going to make something for dinner tonight. And, and she was always good. It always came out slamming, as we all know. But it was definitely a little different or off the cuff. The thing I have, and look, as far as Grady Jarrett, and anybody that listens to Locked On Browns, we have tried to put this guy into Cleveland for a million stinking years. Just a really, really solid player. He's totally happy where he is. And it's almost similar to Joe Thomas in that. I don't want to leave here. I like where I'm at. This is perfect for me. I'm getting the money I would get anywhere else. So no, I'd rather not go anywhere else. But as far as the Browns' offensive line and their running game, because, Aaron, look, the running games you have seen to this point are not the running game you're going to see this week. Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, this offensive line, whatever, transitions they have to make or guys they have to move in and out, it just continuously seems to work for this offense as far as the running game keeping their cohesion.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm most worried about against this Browns team. It's just them just running it down the Falcons' throat. And if the Falcons do have that passing game advantage, where they can get the ball to their playmakers like Drake London and like Kyle Pitts, you can keep that offense on the sideline by basically Nick Chubb just running through what has been a relatively soft front for the Falcons run defense so far this season. So, I know many of Falcon fans certainly have been following Nick Chubb's career closely just from the Georgia ties. And certainly the last time we played the Browns, he has a couple of big highlight reel runs in that game. And so I think that's the thing that's sort of in the back of most Falcon fans' minds when they look at this matchup. So as I said earlier, it could be a race to 200 yards on the ground for both of these teams.
Totally agree. I think this is a fun game because there's a lot of unknowns here, right? And we are the last 1 o'clock game. Like they got the D team, they got the F broadcasting team on this one. I'm like, who's calling the game? So
Tiki's in the house. Tiki Barber is in the house. Well, it's good though. At least we have somebody who's good running back to talk about a lot of running.
So, this is for the diehards. They're going to show this in 2 markets, in Cleveland and Atlanta. So if you're outside of the market, I'm sorry, you're not going to get much. But I'm interested to see how it goes because this is a throwback game. This reminds me of 80s style football where it's runs and a few play actions, and then we'll see whose running back is better.
Yeah. And, I think that sort of matchup, could make it for some interesting final scores as we continue today's crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks here with Locked On Falcons and Locked On Browns. And we'll wrap you guys up, give you sort of the final lowdown as we head into this weekend's matchup. But before we get there, the internet can be the place for epic fails. Maybe that's getting stiff armed to death by Nick Chubb or maybe getting mossed by Kyle Pitts. But you don't want your epic fails to go plastered all over the internet, like such as, you're getting down on one knee to that significant other in front of 20,000 people and she says no, or you're on a boat somewhere and that ring slips off someone's finger and winds up in the water. You don't want to see yourself go viral for the wrong reasons. And while there's no insurance to prevent that special someone from saying no to you, there is protection to keep that ring from winding up in the wrong place. And people at Bright Cold Jewelry and Watch Insurance will make sure that you get the replacement for the full value of your ring. It only takes a few minutes. It's $5 a month to make sure that no matter if your jewelry is lost, it's stolen, or you just can't figure out what happened to it, you have it covered. Just go to bright.co/lockedon. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your butt with the best jewelry insurance in the business. Again, that's Bright, BRITE.co/lockedon.
Welcome back to the Locked On NFL crossover. This week, Atlanta Falcons versus the Cleveland Browns. And obviously, it must be a Thursday on Crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Podcast Networks. This is, of course, sponsored by Prize Picks, prizepicks.com. And definitely check that out at your own leisure. Guys, we talked about the matchups. We talked about, a few key places that we think each other could give each other a little bit of problems. Now it's time to get to our final thoughts and kind of overarching themes to this game. For me, guys, I look at it in terms of the quarterbacks. We talked about them a little bit, but both guys, journeymen, so to speak, both guys played for other teams. Both guys bounced around the league a little bit, and both guys looking for a resurgence in their career. You look at it from Marcus Mariota. And you look at Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett has played very well the last 2 games. And here in Cleveland, people are like kind of surprised, like, "Hey, what the heck is Jacoby Brissett doing now? This isn't the guy we thought he was going to be." So he's a guy who now we talked about earlier in a couple of our shows. Aaron, me and Jeff are like, we thought the defense was going to be the calling card for this team with Myles Garrett and some of those big name people, and now all of a sudden, you might be asking Jacoby Brissett to hold you down for a little bit, you put some points on the board. So for me, it's going to come down in the running games. To me, could be a wash. It could be, hey, they're going to get some yards on the ground. We're going to rack up some yards on the ground. It's going to come down to Jacoby Brissett, Marcus Mariota, when you need a third down conversion, when you need to put the game away with maybe a couple throws at the end, which one of those guys do you have capabilities and you have, confidence in that's going to be able to make those throws if they are backup level quarterbacks, which both of them are? And I think it comes down to that eventually. Your thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, I don't think Falcon fans want to hear you say that, because the last time the Falcons faced Jacoby Brissett back in 2019, when he was with the Colts, he absolutely cooked the Falcons defense in that game. I think he completed like 75% of his passes. He had over 300 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns in that game. And basically the Falcons made it so easy for Jacoby Brissett to look like, oh, this guy's a real starter. This is not a backup. This is a real starter the last time he faced him. So I don't think Falcon fans want to see a repeat of that. And so if it comes down to Jacoby Brissett, at least with the lasting memory he's made to Falcon fans' eyes, and then Marcus Mariota, which is the memories that he has made in Falcons fans' eyes these past 3 weeks. As I said earlier, he's been solid this year, but it's been up and down. It's been a roller coaster. You get some of these very untimely turnovers, fumbles, interceptions late in games, and if that continues this weekend, that does not bode particularly well for the Falcons. If it's going to come down to, hey, this guy needs to make a play in the fourth quarter in order for this football team to win the game. That hasn't necessarily been the case in these first 3 games for the Falcons. And so that is not necessarily a promising sign. So I'm hoping it's just a Nick Chubb versus Cordarrelle Patterson duel. And ultimately Cordarrelle Patterson will be the guy that the Falcons can lean on to get them the W on Sunday.
Well, it's kind of funny you said that, because, week 2, a lot of people were saying, hey, as long as Joe Flacco doesn't beat us, I think we're going to be all right. But you give a man enough time, you know how it's going to work out. I think for the Browns, the key thing this week is I think the Browns kind of can have a little bit of a rallying cry moment, with everything and as nervous as everybody was with Myles and understanding the tension right now. Look, I mean, we haven't even mentioned his name, but the Browns are about to get one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL to this team in December. But you're talking about guys that are bridging the gap. And now that you're 2-1 and you smell the chance that maybe you could be 3-1, which is going to give you another week on top of the AFC North, is this team going to be able to rally around this and say, look, and keeping also in mind that you look at the Charger game, the Patriot game, and maybe they're not as daunting as they once looked, 4 or 5 weeks ago. So for the Browns here, it's, if you want some team just, continue feeling legitimate about this current product, go out there and get this one. And there also is the factor of all the stuff, maybe trying to rally around the fact that Myles Garrett won't play, trying to cover your superstar. But there's a lot of guys on this Browns team who have some pretty good ties to this area, from the South, whether it's Nick Chubb, whether it's LeCount, there's plenty of players here, the LSU ties. You only get one trip every couple of years to go near the area where you're from. So you want to go show out. So there's a lot on the Browns, and would certainly be disappointing if this team, went in there and at least didn't give a great showing. You lose, you lose. Sometimes you lose. That's the way it is. But if they went in there with all of these factors equated into it and didn't go in there with a strong showing, a lot of people would be really concerned about this product over the next 8 weeks.
Yeah, it's a similar story with the Falcons. Obviously, I know the Browns kind of went into the season until all the sort of suspension stuff with sort of playoff aspirations, and they see themselves as a playoff team. And as Garrett mentioned earlier, the Falcons are in the midst of a rebuild, but they're looking at some things coming up. Like, I talked about this yesterday on Locked On Falcons, where, like, you asked me a month ago, I would have sat here and said there's no chance that the Falcons are going to be able to beat a team like Tampa Bay in week 5, or San Francisco in week 6, or Cincinnati in week 7. And now we sit here and we go, hey, look, those games look a lot more winnable today than they did a month ago. And, if you're a Falcon fan, you're kind of looking at this thing where, okay, well, if we have any, not to look ahead to the next matchups, but if this team is a legitimate team, a team that can really be competitive week in and week out, as they've shown these last couple of games, this is kind of a game. I won't say a must win or anything like that, but you expect this team to be able to take care of business against a down Browns team that's a little beat up, that, some of your strengths as a running football team, match up pretty favorably against their weaknesses, at least heading into this week due to the injuries. And you're at home and you want to build that sort of home field advantage, where the Falcons, since they moved in to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, from the Georgia Dome, just really haven't had that same home field advantage. And so I, again, not a must win, but certainly a game where you feel pretty good that the Falcons have a golden opportunity to really take care of business on Sunday.
I think it's going to be one of those things where you just mentioned, you'll find out on Sunday. We'll know a lot more about each of these teams on Sunday, because like you said, if the Falcons want to be known as a team that is taking that step, making those strides, you think that you can win this game at home. You got it at home. There's no Myles Garrett. You got Amari Cooper, but you're not really worried about any of the secondary guys. No Jadeveon Clowney, and the defensive line room was already kind of banged up, and they were kind of soft in the middle anyway. Linebackers are gone, so you feel like you can run the football. And when you're at home, coming off a win, this is a game that, as a Falcons fan, you say, all right, well, this is a barometer. Let's see how real you guys are. Same thing for the Browns. Adversity hits, adversity strikes. You got a lot of players down. This is going to be a game that you see exactly what your team is. Because great teams, when I always talk about it, is when you watch the Patriots and the consistent teams like the Ravens or the consistent teams like the Chiefs, they always seem to find a way to get it done no matter who's out. They can continue to find a way to score points and stop people. And I think this is going to really show you whether or not the Browns are truly, truly, truly a contender if they can win through some of this adversity and different things like that. Jeff, go ahead and wrap us up, man.
And one other thing is, you look at the Browns, 2-1. You look at the Falcons, 1-2. Aaron, anybody think the Seattle Seahawks are going to the playoffs? Nope. Browns fans, anybody think that the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Carolina Panthers are going to the playoffs? So your records are your records, but, you haven't really truly played anybody just yet. But you try to stack together those wins, just put it together. And the one thing that both these teams have done consistently at this point is score points. And you know what? You score points, sometimes things will bounce back into your favor. Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons. Aaron's been with the network forever. Like me, he's a lifer. We got our own separate lockers. They're old now. We actually get new master locks like they just wore out from rust over the years. Garrett Bush, part of Locked On Browns. Garrett's been a great addition. I cannot say enough good things about him in the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. And Aaron, Locked On Atlanta, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for us, the Browns fans, Garrett's show, Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, Aaron is part of the Atlanta show, very similar, always talking all the topics. I'm going to be nice to Aaron. We're not even going to talk about Braves, Mets this weekend. There's enough here with just Browns, Falcons. We're just going to let all that just marinate. We'll see where we're at after the weekend. It's always a pleasure to sit down and do these because, we have a big network here. We don't get to sit down with everybody and talk as much as we would love to and the other thing is we all have lives and a bunch of other things we got to do. So we're looking forward to this. So Falcons, Browns, Sunday in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, as Aaron said, for everybody in the area, surrounding areas, weather-wise, fingers crossed, hope everything works out for everybody. We're not trying to, downplay anything, but, we do have a job to do, and there will be a game played Sunday. And, we got to do our job and talk about it here. Browns, Falcons, a lot of names, a lot of good players. We'll see the way it all plays out. It's always a pleasure to do these crossovers. Locked On NFL crossover, Locked On Falcons, Locked On Browns. We appreciate everybody for being along for the ride today.